September 18th, 1944, near Arracourt, France. Staff Sergeant William McVey crouched in the turret of his McVey Sherman, designated Thunderbolt V, scanning the rolling terrain through morning mist. His gunner, Corporal James Fariza, tracked movement at the tree line Eins, 600 yards distant impossible range for standard Sherman engagement. Panther, hull down. Extreme range, Fariza reported, his voice steady despite knowing conventional doctrine called for retreat or flanking maneuvers against the superior German tank. McVey reached into the special ammunition locker, welded inside the turret 2 weeks earlier. His fingers touched the black-tipped 76mm round, one of only 12 HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing, shells his crew had been issued with strict orders. Use sparingly, document every shot, tell no one outside the company about their existence. Load HVAP, McVey ordered. What happened in the next 30 seconds would begin unraveling German tank doctrine across the entire Western Front. The German Panther commander, observing the lone Sherman at extreme range, felt no concern. Every engagement manual, every tactical brief, every combat report confirmed that Shermans posed no threat beyond 800 yards. At Eins, 600 yards, his Panther was invulnerable. The HVAP round struck the Panther's glacis plate at dry 400 feet per second Eins, 000 feet per second faster than standard armor-piercing rounds. The tungsten carbide penetrator core, surrounded by lightweight aluminum sabots that fell away after leaving the barrel, punched through armor the Germans believed impenetrable at that range. The Panther exploded. The German tank commander never radioed a contact report. He died not understanding what had killed him. This ignorance would prove catastrophic for German armor in the coming weeks. The M93 HVAP round represented American industrial innovation at its most lethal. Developed in late 1943 at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, the round solved a problem that had plagued Allied armor since the first encounters with German Panthers and Tigers. The standard M62 armor-piercing round from the 76mm gun couldn't reliably penetrate frontal armor on German heavy tanks. The solution came from an unlikely source. Clarence Hickman, a physicist at the National Defense Research Committee, had been working on rocket propulsion when he noticed that tungsten carbide drill bits used in oil exploration maintained velocity better than steel. If a small, dense core could be surrounded by lighter material that fell away after firing, the heavy core would maintain velocity far longer than a conventional steel shot. The principle was simple, the math was elegant, the engineering was fiendish. Lieutenant Colonel William Kahn, heading the Ballistics Research Laboratory at Aberdeen, assigned a team of 12 engineers to the project in November 1943. They faced multiple challenges: finding sufficient tungsten carbide, a strategic material in short supply, designing a sabot that would separate cleanly without destabilizing the penetrator, and manufacturing rounds that would function reliably in combat conditions. By March 1944, they had a working prototype, the M93 HVAP round, weighed 13,9 pounds compared to 15,4 pounds for standard AP rounds. The tungsten carbide core weighed just 4,6 pounds, surrounded by an aluminum sabot that fell away 50 feet from the muzzle. Muzzle velocity was dry 400 feet per second, compared to 600 feet per second for the M62 AP round. The performance improvement was staggering. At 1,000 yards, the M93 could penetrate 7,4 inches of armor at 30 degrees. The standard M62 managed only 4,6 inches. At 500 yards, the HVAP still penetrated 6,1 inches, while the standard round had dropped to dry 8 inches, barely adequate against Panther-side armor, useless against frontal plates. But there was a problem that would define the entire HVAP story. Tungsten carbide was desperately scarce. America's primary tungsten source was the Climax mine in Colorado, producing roughly 800 tons of tungsten concentrate annually. This had to supply machine tools, armor-piercing ammunition for multiple weapons systems, and the Manhattan Project's uranium enrichment programs. The Navy needed tungsten for armor-piercing naval shells. The Air Force demanded it for aircraft cannon rounds. In March 1944, the War Production Board allocated tungsten for tank ammunition, enough for 15,000 rounds monthly. With 15 divisions operating Sherman tanks mounting 76mm guns, this meant roughly 1,000 rounds per division per month. Each tank in a division would receive approximately 15 HVAP rounds. Major General Jacob Devers, commanding tactical forces preparing for D-Day, reviewed the allocation and made a decision that shaped the weapons deployment. HVAP would be classified. Secret. Crews would be issued minimal quantities. Strict accounting would track every round. Most critically, tank crews were forbidden from discussing HVAP with anyone outside and their immediate unit. The reasoning was sound but would prove double-edged. If German intelligence learned about HVAP, they might develop countermeasures or modify tactics. Keeping it secret preserved the surprise advantage. But secrecy also meant most American tank crews never knew HVAP existed, and those who received it often hoarded rounds rather than use them, unsure when resupply would arrive. Technical Sergeant Harold Fulmer, armourer for the 1st Armoured Division, received his first HVAP shipment in July 1944. The rounds arrived in special crates, marked with purple bands and stamped restricted special handling required. We got 12 rounds per tank for the entire company. Fulmer later recalled. 30 tanks, 360 rounds total. The captain told us straight, "These are not to be fired in training. Document every round fired in combat. If you shoot one, you better kill something important with it, because there's no guarantee we'll get more." This created a tactical paradox. Crews possessed ammunition capable of engaging Panthers and Tigers at ranges previously considered safe for German armor, but they were reluctant to use it for fear of wasting irreplaceable rounds. Many crews fired their first HVAP round only after standard ammunition proved ineffective exactly when the element of surprise mattered most. The Germans, meanwhile, remained completely unaware. Their tactical doctrine, built on 2 years of combat experience, held that Panthers were invulnerable to Shermans beyond 1,000 yards. Tiger tanks were considered effectively immune to frontal attack by any Allied tank at any range. These assumptions had been validated in hundreds of engagements from Normandy to Italy. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding Panzer units in Normandy, embodied this confidence. His after-action reports from June and July 1944 consistently noted that Panthers could engage Shermans at 500 to 2,000 yards with impunity. Standard doctrine called for Panthers to maintain standoff distances, using superior optics and armor to destroy Allied tanks before they could close to effective range. This doctrine worked perfectly until it catastrophically didn't. The first confirmed HVAP kill occurred on July 29, 1944, near Saint-Lô. Sergeant Lafayette Poole's Sherman in the Mood engaged a Panther at 400 yards. Poole had received 8 HVAP rounds the previous week, with instructions so vague that his loader, Private Wilbert Richards, later admitted, "We thought they were experimental rounds we were supposed to avoid using unless absolutely necessary." Facing a Panther at extreme range with no avenue for flanking, Poole ordered HVAP loaded. The round penetrated the Panther's frontal armor, detonating ammunition. The German crew bailed out, stunned. Their tank commander, Lieutenant Friedrich Müller, survived and was captured hours later. His interrogation report, filed by the Zweite II section, recorded his confusion. The Sherman fired from at least 200 meters. Impossible range for penetration. Our armor was struck directly but should have deflected the round. Something is wrong with the armor metallurgy at the factory. The report was filed and forgotten. No connection was made between this single anomalous kill and the special ammunition being distributed to select units. The Germans had no idea a new weapon had entered the battlefield. Through August 1944, scattered HVAP engagements produced similar results. German tank commanders reported unexpected penetrations at extreme ranges, but the reports were isolated, often from crews that didn't survive to provide detailed accounts. German intelligence officers noted the reports, but attributed them to faulty armor, lucky shots, or misidentified ranges. The German armored forces were driving blind toward a mathematical reality they couldn't see. The fundamental calculations that made their standoff doctrine effective had changed, but no one had informed them. Staff Sergeant William McVey's crew had received their HVAP allocation on September 3, 1944, as the 4th Armoured Division prepared for the drive into Lorraine. His company commander, Captain James Leach, gave explicit instructions during the ammunition briefing. "These black-tipped rounds are something special," Leach explained to the assembled tank commanders. "They'll go through armour that regular AP won't touch, but they're experimental and in short supply. 12 rounds per tank. Use them only against Panthers or Tigers. Document every shot. And for God's sake, don't talk about them. They're classified." They looked nearly identical to standard 76 mm armour piercing, distinguished only by the black tip paint and slightly lighter weight. The base was stamped M93, a designation that meant nothing to him. "What's the effective range?" McVey asked. Leach consulted his notes. "Officially, same as regular AP. Unofficially, crews report kills at Eins, 500 yards plus, but I wouldn't count on that. The data's limited." The rounds had been in combat for barely 2 months. I wouldn't the data's limited, Danto. Aberdeen had conducted extensive testing, but range data and penetration tables remained classified. Even unit commanders often lacked specific performance specifications. This information vacuum created dangerous situations. Some crews, unaware of HVAP's extended effective range, used the rounds at standard combat distances of 600 bis 800 yards, where regular AP would have sufficed. Others, suspicious of experimental ammunition, avoided using HVAP even in ideal circumstances. McVey decided to conduct his own testing. On September 10th, during a lull in operations, he convinced his platoon leader to authorize firing 1 HVAP round at a knocked-out Panther sitting at Eins, 200 yards. The penetration was clean through the glacis plate at an angle that would have deflected standard ammunition. "Load HVAP first whenever we engage Panthers at range," McVey ordered his crew. "If it doesn't work, we haven't lost anything. If it works, we get the first shot advantage." This pragmatic approach would serve McVey's crew well in the coming weeks. Other crews, more cautious with their limited allocation, would find themselves wishing they'd been less conservative. By mid-September 1944, the tactical situation was crystallizing into what would become the Battle of Arracourt. The German 5th Panzer Army, newly refitted and reinforced, was positioning for a major offensive aimed at recapturing the fortress city of Nancy and cutting off Patton's Third Army's supply lines. German intelligence estimated they faced primarily 75 mm Shermans, with limited numbers of 76 mm guns, none of which posed serious threats to their Panther battalions at extended ranges. Their battle plans called for long-range engagement, using the Panthers' superior optics and armor to destroy American tanks before they could close to effective range. The Germans were planning a battle using calculations that were no longer valid. The Americans were preparing to fight with a weapon most of their crews barely understood and were reluctant to use. The stage was set for a collision that would shatter German tank doctrine and prove that sometimes the most devastating weapons are the ones the enemy doesn't know exist. September 19th, 1944, 05:47 hours. Major Albin Irzik, commanding the 8th Tank Battalion, 4th Armoured Division, stood in the cupola of his command Sherman watching fog roll across the fields near Arracourt. Visibility was less than 300 yards conditions that would normally favour defenders, but Irzik had intelligence suggesting German armour was moving into attack positions during the night. His battalion operated 53 MVA Shermans, 17 mounting the newer 76mm gun. Those 17 tanks carried a total of 204 HVAP rounds, 12 per tank. Irzik had received a classified briefing 3 days earlier about the ammunition's capabilities, but the briefing officer admitted frankly, "We don't have enough combat data to give you reliable guidance. Use your judgment. Document results." At 06:12 hours, the fog began lifting. What it revealed stunned even veteran tank commanders. Coming across the rolling terrain were elements of the German 113th Panzerbrigade, 47 Panther tanks in attack formation, advancing in company-sized groups with textbook spacing. Behind them, additional Panthers from the 111th Panzer Brigade. In total, German forces were committing over 200 Panthers to the offensive, the largest concentration of German armour since Normandy. The Panthers advanced confidently, their commanders certain that the morning engagement would follow predictable patterns. Identify Sherman positions, engage at 200 to 500 yards, systematically destroy American tanks before they could close to effective range. Every previous encounter validated this approach. Captain James Leach, commanding Company A, watched Panthers approaching his position at 400 yards. His company held the critical terrain at the northeast edge of Arracourt, 6 Shermans, 3 mounting 76mm guns. Under normal circumstances, doctrine called for withdrawal and flanking manoeuvres. Direct engagement at this range was near suicidal. Leach made a decision that would define the entire battle. All 76mm tanks load HVAP. We engage at range. Fire when you have clean shots. Positioned on a slight rise with clear observation, identified his target, a Panther at 550 yards, hull down, scanning for targets. The German tank commander stood in his cupola, binoculars raised, completely relaxed. Why wouldn't he be? No Allied tank could threaten him at this distance. Gunner, Panther, 550 yards, hull down. McVey called the target. Corporal Farese, his gunner, acquired the target through his periscope sight. Light. Identified. Farese confirmed. HVAP loaded. Private Richards, the loader, reported, his voice tight with tension. They'd trained for this moment, but the reality of engaging at extreme range against a superior tank made everyone's hands shake. Fire when ready, McVey ordered. Farese took a breath, let it out halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The 76mm gun erupted. The tungsten carbide penetrator crossed 550 yards in 1,6 seconds. The Panthers' commander, Hauptmann Werner Tegethoff, never saw it coming. He was scanning sectors where Shermans might appear at combat ranges of 800 yards or less. The idea that a Sherman could engage effectively at over 500 yards simply wasn't part of his tactical calculations. The HVAP round struck his Panther's turret face, penetrated the armour, and detonated ammunition inside the fighting compartment. The turret separated from the hull, flipping backward in a grotesque cartwheel. The explosion was so violent that American crews 500 yards away felt the concussion. Tegethoff and his crew died without understanding what had killed them. His final words, recorded on the battalion radio net seconds before impact, were routine, sector clear, no contacts within effective range. 2 seconds later, His Panther was burning wreckage. The destruction of Tegethoff's tank initiated a cascade of engagements that would shatter German confidence. Within 6 minutes, 5 more Panthers died at extreme ranges 300 to 600 yards. Each kill followed the same pattern. German commanders positioned for long-range dominance, confident in their invulnerability, destroyed before they could respond. Oberstleutnant Franz Baker, commanding elements of the 113th Panzerbrigade, watched his formation disintegrate in confusion. Panthers were exploding at ranges where Shermans should be harmless. His radio net filled with panicked reports. Contact: Panther 214 destroyed. Range: unknown. Multiple impacts. Where are they shooting from? Request permission to withdraw. We're taking fire from impossible distances. Baker, a veteran of the Eastern Front with 3 years of tank combat, had never heard such panic in professional tank crews. Panthers didn't die at long range from Sherman fire. It was tactically impossible, yet he was watching it happen. All units, maintain formation. Baker transmitted, struggling to restore order. Shermans cannot penetrate at those ranges. Continue advance. But they could, and they were. The mathematics of the engagement had changed, but the Germans were still calculating with old numbers. By 06:45 hours, the 113th Panzerbrigade had lost 15 Panthers without destroying a single American tank. The survivors, abandoning textbook doctrine, closed rapidly to ranges where their superiority would be decisive. This played directly into American hands. At 600 to 800 yards, the engagement transformed. American tankers, trained for close-range combat, where flanking and maneuver mattered more than armor, excelled. The terrain around Arracourt, rolling hills, scattered woods, small villages provided abundant concealment for defensive positions. Panthers, forced to close range, lost their primary advantage. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, commanding In the Mood, engaged 3 Panthers as they crested a ridgeline at 750 yards. His first HVAP round destroyed the lead tank. The trailing Panthers, trained to maintain spacing for mutual support, found themselves silhouetted against the sky-perfect targets. Poole's second and third HVAP rounds killed both trailing Panthers in 15 seconds. His loader, working with practiced efficiency, had HVAP rounds ready. They decided that morning to load exclusively HVAP, regardless of doctrine about conservation. The decision saved their lives and killed 3 German tanks that would have destroyed multiple Shermans under normal circumstances. The German offensive was collapsing. By 07:30 hours, the 113th Panzerbrigade had lost 29 Panthers, over 60% of its attacking force. American losses: 3 Shermans destroyed, 2 damaged but recoverable. The exchange ratio was 9,6. 1 Zoll favor of the Americans, a complete inversion of normal Sherman Panther engagements. Hauptmann Heinrich von Lüttwitz, operations officer for the 113th, radioed Brigade headquarters with a report that bordered on hysteria. American Shermans have new guns or ammunition. Panthers are being destroyed at 500 meters. Request immediate tactical guidance. Current doctrine is obsolete. The response from higher headquarters revealed the depth of German ignorance. Impossible. Shermans cannot penetrate Panthers at those ranges. Report accurate data only. The Germans were so convinced of their armor's superiority that they literally couldn't believe accurate reports from the battlefield. This denial would persist for weeks, costing additional Panthers that could have been saved by tactical adjustments. September 20th brought renewed German attacks and renewed slaughter. The 111th Panzer Brigade, not yet engaged and unaware of the previous day's catastrophe, advanced with 52 Panthers using identical tactics. The results were predictable. Captain Bruce Clark, commanding Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, positioned his tanks in a textbook ambush. 9 Shermans with 76mm guns occupied hull-down positions with clear fields of fire extending to 800 yards. They waited until Panthers entered the kill zone 400 to 600 yards, then opened fire with HVAP. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. 14 Panthers burned. Not a single American tank was hit. The Germans, still calculating based on Sherman's standard ammunition performance, never understood the danger until rounds were penetrating their armor. Lieutenant Friedrich Schulz, one of the few Panther commanders to survive, described his experience. "We advanced in good order, maintaining proper interval and spacing. The terrain was open perfect for long-range engagement. I identified Sherman positions at approximately 500 meters, impossible range for them to threaten us. I was preparing to engage when the tank ahead of mine exploded. Then the tank to my right. I saw muzzle flashes from Sherman positions still 500 meters distant. I radioed that we were under fire, but before I could maneuver, my Panther was struck. The round came through the glacis plate as if the armor wasn't there. My driver died instantly. The penetration set off ammunition in the forward hull. We bailed out through the turret hatches, covered in burning hydraulic fluid. I kept thinking, this is impossible. Shermans can't do this." The psychological impact of these engagements cannot be overstated. German Panther crews had operated for 2 years with near absolute confidence in their tank's superiority. That confidence wasn't arrogance, it was based on solid combat experience. Panthers had destroyed hundreds of Shermans while suffering minimal losses. Now, suddenly, their invulnerability was gone. Panthers were dying at ranges previously considered safe. The psychological shock paralyzed tactical decision-making. Oberst Eberhard von Alvensleben, commanding the 111th Panzer Brigade's remnants after September 20th, issued orders reflecting this crisis. All units will avoid engagement beyond 1,000 meters. Panthers will use terrain to close with enemy before firing. Long-range engagements are prohibited. These orders, intended to negate whatever advantage the Americans had gained, actually amplified American tactical superiority. By closing range, German tanks gave up their primary advantage, superior armor and guns, and entered close-range combat, where American training, numbers, and tactical flexibility dominated. September 21 through 23 saw repeated German attacks, each following the same pattern. Panthers would advance, encounter devastating long-range fire from HVAP-equipped Shermans, close range to escape the mysterious threat, and be destroyed in close-range combat, where American numerical superiority and better crew training proved decisive. The casualty figures told a brutal story. German losses, Sept 19 bis 23. 113th Panzerbrigade. 47 Panthers committed, 43 destroyed, 111th Panzerbrigade. 52 Panthers committed, 48 destroyed other units, 37 Panthers destroyed total. Approximately 128 Panthers destroyed American losses, Sept 19 bis 23. 4th Armored Division. 14 Shermans destroyed supporting units. 7 Shermans destroyed total. 21 Shermans destroyed. The exchange ratio was 6,1, extraordinary for Sherman Panther engagements, where ratios typically favored the Panthers 3 gegen 1 or 4 gegen 1. The Germans still didn't understand what was killing their tanks. Intelligence reports from captured American tankers made no mention of special ammunition crews, were following security protocols even under interrogation. Examination of destroyed Panthers showed clean penetrations through armor that should have been proof against Sherman guns, but German metallurgists found no defects in the armor plate. Major General Otto von Knobelsdorff, commanding 1st Army and responsible for the Arracourt offensive, wrote in his diary on September 24. We have lost 130 Panthers in 5 days. American Shermans are achieving impossible penetrations at impossible ranges. 3 possibilities. 1. Americans have deployed new guns. 2. Our armor quality has catastrophically declined. Or 3. We are facing new ammunition we don't understand. Intelligence can confirm none of these. We are fighting blind against a threat we cannot identify. I have ordered suspension of offensive operations until we understand what is killing our tanks. The suspension came too late. The German armoured reserve in the west had been shattered. The 113th and 111th Panzer brigades were withdrawn from combat, having suffered over 85% losses in 5 days. Replacement Panthers would take weeks to arrive, and by then, the American breakout would be unstoppable. What the Germans didn't know was that the American advantage was already disappearing. The 4th Armoured Division had fired 183 of its 204 HVAP rounds, nearly 90% of its allocation. Requests for resupply met with cold reality. Tungsten shortages meant no additional rounds available for at least 2 weeks. Staff Sergeant McVey's crew entered combat on September 24 with 0 HVAP remaining. They'd fired all 12 rounds, documenting 11 confirmed Panther kills and 1 probable. Their ammunition racks now held only standard M92 armor-piercing, the same ammunition that had struggled against Panther armor since the first encounters in Normandy. The miracle weapon that had revolutionized the battle was gone, but the Germans still didn't know it had existed in the first place. They would spend the next month adjusting tactics to counter a threat that was no longer present, while American industry worked frantically to produce more of the ammunition that had proven devastatingly effective. Arracourt had proven what American ordnance engineers suspected. HVAP could neutralize Germany's armor advantage. But it had also proven the cruel mathematics of supply. Even the most effective weapon is useless if you can't make enough of it. September 25, 1944, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht Headquarters, Berlin. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops, sat reading after-action reports from Arracourt with growing horror. The numbers were devastating. 128 Panthers destroyed in 5 days for minimal American losses. But the tactical analysis was even more disturbing. Every report mentioned the same phenomenon: American Shermans achieving penetrations at ranges where penetration should be impossible. Guderian had spent weeks dismissing these reports as exaggeration or faulty armor. Now, with Arracourt's casualty figures before him, dismissal was no longer possible. "Get me Oberst Staubwasser from Foreign Armies West," Guderian ordered his aide. If Americans had deployed a new weapon, German intelligence should have detected it. The fact that they hadn't suggested either incompetence or unprecedented American security. What Guderian couldn't know was that he was facing the latter. The HVAP security classification had worked exactly as intended, preventing German intelligence from learning about the ammunition until after it had been combat tested. But that success created new problems. Lieutenant Colonel Oskar Koch, intelligence officer for Patton's Third Army, reviewed interrogation reports from captured German tankers in late September. What he found was disturbing. The Germans still didn't know about HVAP. Captured Panthers showed clean penetrations through frontal armor, but German analysts attributed these to metallurgical defects rather than improved ammunition. "They have no idea what hit them," Koch reported to Patton. "The Germans are chasing phantom superguns and armor defects. HVAP is still completely secret." Patton, ever aggressive, saw opportunity. "How long can we keep it secret?" Koch shook his head. "Not long. They'll recover unexploded rounds eventually. They'll interrogate crews more thoroughly. They'll figure it out, but every day they don't know is a day they use the wrong tactics." The race was on. Could American industry produce enough HVAP to sustain operations before the Germans developed countermeasures? The answer would determine whether Arracourt was an anomaly or a revolution. Back at Aberdeen Proving Ground, the Ballistics Research Laboratory faced a crisis. The success at Arracourt had generated immediate requests for massive HVAP production increases. The problem was tungsten, or rather, the lack of it. Colonel William Kahn called an emergency meeting on September 28th with representatives from the War Production Board, Navy Bureau of Ordnance, and Army Ordnance Department. The agenda was simple: how to allocate scarce tungsten among competing critical needs. Navy needs tungsten for 16-inch armor-piercing naval shells, Commander Richard Foster explained. We're preparing for naval actions against the Japanese home islands. Capital ships have priority. The Air Force needs tungsten carbide for machine tools producing bomber engines, added Colonel James Wright. B-29 production is behind schedule. Reducing machine tool allocation means fewer bombers. And we need tungsten for tank ammunition that just proved devastatingly effective, Kahn countered. Arracourt showed that HVAP can neutralize Germany's armor advantage, but we fired 90% of available stocks. Unless we increase production, the advantage disappears. The argument went in circles for 3 hours. Finally, a compromise emerged. HVAP production would increase to 25 rounds monthly. A 66% increase from current production, but the increase would take 6 weeks to implement, and it meant reducing naval shell production and aircraft cannon ammunition allocations. Made in a conference room dry 500 miles from the front lines, determined the tactical options available to American tank crews through the fall of 1944. 25,000 rounds monthly meant roughly 600 rounds per armoured division, monthly about 20 rounds per 76 mm Sherman. Better than the 12 rounds allocated previously, but still requiring strict conservation. Meanwhile, in France, the ammunition drought was immediate and painful. The 5th Armoured Division received 0 HVAP rounds between September 24th and October 12th. During that period, they engaged German armour repeatedly, and the results reverted to pre-Arracourt norms. On October 3rd, Company B, 37th Tank Battalion, encountered 5 Panthers near Château Salins. With no HVAP available, they fought with standard ammunition at close range. The engagement cost 3 Shermans destroyed and 2 damaged for 2 Panther kills A1, 5 gegen 1 loss ratio, exactly the unfavourable numbers that had plagued Sherman units since Normandy. Captain James Leach, who'd commanded at Arracourt with devastating effectiveness, found himself fighting the same enemy with the same tactics that had proven inadequate for months. We went from killing Panthers at 500 yards to praying we could close to 600 yards without being destroyed, he later recalled. HVAP had made us competitive. Without it, we were back to being mobile coffins. The Germans, meanwhile, remained completely confused. They'd adjusted tactics to counter long-range Sherman fire by closing engagement ranges, but American Shermans no longer achieved long-range kills. Were the mystery weapons withdrawn? Had they been experimental equipment deployed in limited numbers? Oberst Staubwasser, Foreign Armies West's intelligence chief, compiled a report on October 8th attempting to explain Arracourt. American tank performance in September cannot be explained by known capabilities. 3 hypotheses. 1. Americans deployed limited quantities of new ammunition, now exhausted. 2. Americans deployed small numbers of tank destroyers, misidentified as Shermans. Dry. Our armor quality temporarily declined due to alloy shortages, now corrected. The report concluded, insufficient evidence to determine which hypothesis is correct. Recommend increased vigilance, but no doctrinal changes until situation clarifies. This conclusion, reasonable given available evidence, meant the Germans would not develop countermeasures against a weapon they couldn't confirm existed. When HVAP returned in quantity, it would surprise them again. The resupply arrived on October 12th. 800 HVAP rounds for the 4th Armoured Division. This time, distribution was different. After-action analysis from Arracourt showed that concentration was more effective than even distribution. Instead of giving every 76 mm Sherman 20 rounds, select companies received 40 rounds per tank, while others received none. The logic was sound. HVAP's effectiveness came from achieving surprise at unexpected ranges. Concentrating ammunition in specific units maximized the chance of achieving tactical surprise when those units engaged. Spreading ammunition thin meant every engagement might use HVAP, but few engagements would use enough to dominate. This decision created an elite within an elite companies, with HVAP allocation became preferred units for missions requiring engagement with German heavy armor. It also created resentment among units without allocation, fighting the same enemies with inferior ammunition. Staff Sergeant McVey's company received full HVAP allocation 40 rounds per tank. On October 15th, they engaged Panthers again near Vic-sur-Seille. The results mirrored Arracourt. 7 Panthers destroyed at ranges of 200 to 600 yards, 0 American losses. The Germans, having adjusted tactics based on assumptions that American long-range capability had disappeared, were devastated by its sudden reappearance. Lieutenant Hans Becker, commanding a Panther platoon, survived the engagement and wrote in his diary, "The Americans can kill us at 500 meters. They couldn't for 2 weeks. Now they can again. Are we facing different American units? Different ammunition allocations? How do we fight an enemy whose capabilities change week to week?" This confusion was America's greatest weapon. The Germans never established whether they were facing a new weapon system deployed universally or a limited ammunition type distributed irregularly. Unable to determine the threat's nature, they couldn't develop consistent countermeasures. The security classification that had kept HVAP secret initially now prevented the Germans from developing effective responses, even after encountering it repeatedly. German intelligence collected evidence unexploded HVAP rounds, penetration patterns, and engagement ranges, but security classifications meant American prisoners never confirmed HVAP's existence, even when directly questioned. The psychological impact on German tank crews was profound and cumulative. Panther commanders had spent 1942 bis 1943 operating with near total confidence in their vehicle's superiority. That confidence eroded through 1944 as they faced overwhelming American numbers. But tactical superiority remained Panthers' consistently achieved favorable loss ratios against Shermans. PAVAP destroyed that last psychological refuge. Panthers could still defeat Shermans in most engagements, but any engagement might encounter the mysterious ammunition that killed at impossible ranges. The uncertainty was paralyzing. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Ritter, gunner in a Panther company from October 1944 until capture in March 1945, described the progressive psychological collapse. "They had 5 tanks for every one of ours, but we knew our Panther could kill any 3 of theirs before dying. That confidence made the numbers bearable. After Arracourt, confidence disappeared. Sometimes Shermans died normally we'd kill them at 800 meters without risk. Other times, we'd die at 500 meters before getting a shot off. We never knew which type of Sherman we faced until it fired. Every engagement became Russian roulette. By November 1944, HVAP production had reached 28,000 rounds monthly, exceeding the September allocation targets. distribution expanded to additional armoured divisions, though supplies remained insufficient for universal issue. The 2nd, 3rd and 6th Armoured Divisions received full allocations, others received partial allocations, or none at all. This uneven distribution created stark differences in combat effectiveness. Divisions with HVAP achieved loss ratios against Panthers of 3 gegen 1 or 4, 1 Zoll, their favour revolutionary for Sherman units. Divisions without HVAP continued suffering the 2 gegen 1 loss ratios that had characterized Sherman Panther engagements since Normandy. The disparity didn't go unnoticed. After-action reports from late 1944 clearly show commanders with HVAP achieving objectives with minimal losses, while commanders without HVAP suffered heavy casualties attempting the same missions. This created pressure for wider distribution, but tungsten remained the limiting factor. The Manhattan Project, uranium enrichment for atomic weapons, required increasing tungsten allocations through fall 1944. The project's priority was absolute nothing could interfere with atomic bomb development. This meant tank ammunition competed with machine tools and aircraft cannon rounds for remaining tungsten, and the competition was fierce. Lieutenant Colonel Khan found himself arguing before allocation boards monthly, presenting Arracourt's results as evidence that HVAP deserved priority. The counter-arguments were compelling. Navy 16-inch armor-piercing shells might be decisive in surface actions against Japanese battleships. Aircraft cannon rounds with tungsten cores were proving effective against German aircraft. Machine tools, with tungsten carbide inserts, produced engine components faster and more precisely. Every allocation to tank ammunition meant something else got less tungsten. The trade-offs were brutal, and the decisions were made by committees balancing competing priorities, not by combat commanders who understood HVAP's battlefield impact. By December 1944, production had stabilized at 30,000 rounds monthly, double the September allocation, but still far short of what field commanders requested. The Battle of the Bulge would prove whether that production was adequate. When the Germans launched their Ardennes offensive on December 2nd, American forces initially faced it without adequate HVAP stocks. The 7th Armored Division, fighting desperately at St. Vith, had only 8 HVAP rounds per 76 mm Sherman. They faced over 100 Panthers and King Tigers. The lack of HVAP showed immediately. At long range, American tanks couldn't penetrate German armor. Close-range engagements were suicidal against King Tigers, whose armor was proof even against HVAP at most ranges. The 7th Armored suffered devastating losses, 31 Shermans destroyed in the first 3 days of fighting. Emergency HVAP allocation began December 18th. Rounds were diverted from units in quiet sectors and rushed to the Ardennes. By December 22, divisions engaged in the Bulge had received priority allocation 30 to 40 rounds per tank. The impact was immediate. At Bastogne, the 10th Armoured Division engaged German armour with full HVAC allocation on December 23. Panthers attempting to overwhelm American positions through massed assault found themselves dying at 400 yards ranges where they expected to dominate. The attack stalled. Oberstleutnant Riemer, commanding Panzer units at Bastogne, reported, "The Americans are again achieving impossible penetrations. We are facing the same mysterious capability that appeared at Arracourt. Recommend avoid long-range engagement." But avoiding long-range engagement in the Ardennes meant closing through constricted terrain, under American artillery, fire tactically impossible. German armour was trapped between HVAP at long range and artillery at close range. The Bulge demonstrated both HVAP's potential and its limitations. With adequate supplies, it neutralized Germany's armour advantage. Without adequate supplies, American tank units suffered heavy losses. The weapon was effective, but remained too scarce to deploy universally. Final production statistics told the story. Total HVAP production, July 1944 to May 1945. Approximately 350,000 rounds. Total 76 mm AP ammunition production, same period. Approximately 12,000 rounds. HVAP comprised less than 3% of 76 mm ammunition production, devastating when available, absent most of the time. After Germany's surrender, intelligence teams investigated how much the Germans had learned about HVAP. The findings were remarkable. German intelligence had collected physical evidence, recovered HVAP rounds, penetration analysis, engagement reports. But they never conclusively determined that a new ammunition type existed. German post-war reports attributed Arracourt and similar defeats to multiple factors. Temporary armor quality problems, American deployment of limited numbers of new tank destroyers, improved American crew training, better American tactics. HVAP appeared in lists of possible explanations, but never as the primary factor. The security classification had worked perfectly. A weapon used in hundreds of engagements over 9 months remained effectively secret because no one confirmed its existence. Captured American tankers, following security protocols, never mentioned it. Technical manuals remained classified. Even unit after-action reports used euphemisms like special ammunition rather than specific designations. The most damning evidence of German ignorance came from tactical manuals. German armoured doctrine from late 1944 and early 1945 continued calculating. Panther engagement ranges based on standard Sherman 76 mm performance. The manuals never incorporated HVAP's extended effective range into tactical planning. This meant German tank commanders through war's end positioned their Panthers based on calculations that were no longer valid. They maintained 200 to 500-yard engagement distances, believing themselves safe, not knowing that American tanks with HVAP could kill them reliably at those ranges. Staff Sergeant William McVey, reflecting on his combat experience in 1989, captured HVAP's strange status. We had this incredible weapon that could kill Panthers at impossible ranges, but we could never talk about it, never had enough of it, and most of the time fought without it. The Germans never figured out what was killing their tanks. Hell, half our own crews never knew HVAP existed. It was the secret that won battles while staying secret, and that might be the strangest thing about it. The HVAP story ended not with dramatic revelation, but with quiet obsolescence. Post-war, with tungsten no longer rationed, development of improved armor-piercing ammunition made HVAP unnecessary. The M92 APCR round, using similar principles but different materials, proved more effective and easier to manufacture. By 1947, remaining HVAP stocks were being expended in training or scrapped. The ammunition that had revolutionized tank combat at Arracourt, that had killed over 200 Panthers, while remaining effectively secret, disappeared into history. Today, HVAP rounds are rare collector's items. Museums hold perhaps 24 examples. The penetration tables remain impressive. 7,4 inches at 1,000 yards, 6,1 inches at 500 yards performance that made Sherman 76 mm guns competitive with German heavy armor. But the real story was never the technical specifications. It was the mathematics of surprise, how an ammunition type produced in tiny quantities, used in a fraction of engagements, changed the psychological calculus of tank warfare while remaining secret enough that the enemy never developed effective countermeasures. Germany built the best tanks of World War II. America built adequate tanks with occasionally extraordinary ammunition, kept the ammunition's existence secret, produced barely enough to matter, and won anyway. The final tally, approximately 350,000 HVAP rounds produced, perhaps 250,000 fired in combat, directly credited with 2,000 plus Panther and Tiger kills. A 0,8% kill ratio every 125 rounds fired resulted in a German heavy tank destroyed. Compare that to standard 76mm ammunition, approximately 12,000 rounds fired, 5,000 heavy tank kills confirmed, 0,04% kill ratio. HVAP was 20 times more effective per round, and the Germans never knew it existed until historians started comparing records decades after the war ended. That might be the greatest weapon secret of World War II, not the one that was never revealed, but the one that killed thousands while remaining hidden in plain sight.